In the grand theater of human achievement, few moments resonate with the thunderous power of a rocket launch. The air itself seems to tremble, charged with a mixture of raw energy, audacious ambition, and the collective hopes of a planet watching. The final countdown, a rhythmic and vocal ritual, echoes across mission control rooms and broadcast airwaves, each number a step closer to piercing the heavens. It is a symphony of sound. The crackle of radio transmissions, the urgent beeps of consoles, the deafening roar of engines igniting with the force of a controlled explosion. This auditory spectacle is so deeply intertwined with our conception of space exploration that to imagine it any other way feels almost impossible, a story with its most vital element removed. We remember the voices, the calls, the confirmations that signal success. Yet at the very heart of this monumental endeavor, at the core of the calculations that guided humanity to the moon, there existed a profound and unbreakable silence. While the world listened, one of the key architects of the journey could not. He couldn't hear the famous countdown for Apollo 11, nor could he hear the triumphant confirmation from Neil Armstrong that the Eagle had landed. His world was one devoid of the very sounds that defined the mission for everyone else. For him, the launch was not a roar, but a vibration felt deep within his bones, a physical tremor that signaled the start of a journey he had mapped, not with his ears, but with the pure, silent elegance of mathematics. This is where our story truly begins, not in the noise of the launch pad, but in the quiet brilliance of a mind that worked in a different dimension. This narrative is about the unseen forces and the unheard voices that shape history. It is a testament to the idea that genius is not confined to a single sensory experience, but can flourish in the most unexpected of environments. The mission to the moon was a puzzle of unimaginable complexity, a web of physics, engineering and logistics where a single miscalculation could lead to catastrophe. Every thrust, every trajectory, and every second was governed by a language more universal and more precise than any spoken word, the language of numbers. And in this silent logical realm, one man's mind moved with an unparalleled grace and precision, crafting the mathematical pathways that would carry astronauts safely across the void. His name was Dr. Richard T. Sutton, and his contributions were as vital as the rocket fuel, yet as quiet as the vacuum of space itself. His story challenges our fundamental assumptions about what is required for greatness. It asks us to reconsider the nature of communication, collaboration, and understanding. In a world that often equates loudness with importance and visibility with impact, Dr. Sutton's journey offers a powerful counter-narrative. He built his legacy not in conference rooms filled with loud debate, but in the focused solitude of his work, where complex problems were unraveled through deep concentration and intellectual rigor. He didn't need to hear the roar of the rocket, because he had already understood its journey in the most intimate way possible. He had mapped its destiny, written its cosmic song in the silent, immutable ink of equations, long before it ever left the ground. He was the genius you never heard of, a phrase that carries a poignant double meaning. Dr. Richard T. Sutton's name is not etched into the popular memory of the space race alongside the astronauts and mission controllers who became household names. His face does not appear in the iconic photographs of jubilant celebrations at Mission Control in Houston. His anonymity was partly a product of the era's culture, which often relegated the engineers and mathematicians to the background, but it was also deeply connected to the very nature of his existence. Born completely deaf in 1930, in the humble windswept plains of rural Kansas, Richard lived his entire life in a world without sound. His story was obscured not just by the times but by a profound silence that separated him from the hearing world around him. In the 1930s and 40s, the opportunities available to a deaf child were severely limited, often defined by societal misconceptions and a lack of resources. The prevailing belief was that a person who could not hear was inherently limited in their intellectual capacity. The world of abstract thought, of complex scientific theory, and especially of mathematics, was considered beyond their reach. How could someone who couldn't participate in a spoken lecture or a verbal discussion possibly grasp the intricate dance of numbers and formulas? The world, in its ignorance, had already drawn a boundary around Richard's potential, but from his earliest days he demonstrated that his perception of the world was not a lesser version of reality. It was simply a different one, with its own unique advantages and insights. Richard did not listen to numbers. He experienced them in a more tactile and visual way. For him, Mathematics was not a dry or abstract subject communicated through lectures. It was a tangible system of patterns, a visual rhythm, an elegant and perfectly ordered sequence that he could see and feel unfolding in his mind. He perceived the inherent beauty and logic in mathematical structures, with a clarity that was unobscured by the noise and chatter of the outside world. It was a language he was born to understand, a form of communication more pure and precise than any spoken dialect. While others heard music, Richard saw the elegant, silent symphony of calculus, a world of perfect harmony governed by unshakable rules and infinite possibilities. This unique perspective was not a disadvantage, it was his secret weapon. His journey was therefore defined by a quiet, relentless determination to prove that his silence was not a barrier to brilliance. He navigated a world that was not built for him, a world that consistently underestimated his capabilities. Every academic achievement, every complex problem he solved, was a silent rebuttal to the low expectations that society had placed upon him. He was driven by an inner fire, a deep-seated need to explore the universe through the lens of its most fundamental language. This was the foundation of his genius. A mind sharpened by silence, focused by necessity, and uniquely attuned to the patterns that govern the cosmos. His story is not one of overcoming a disability, but of harnessing a different way of being to achieve the extraordinary. The story of the Apollo program is often told as a tale of heroic astronauts and visionary leaders, a national triumph fueled by political will and technological prowess. We celebrate the one small step and the giant leap for mankind, moments immortalized by the voices that broadcast them back to Earth. But behind these iconic moments lies a hidden history, a complex tapestry woven from the efforts of thousands of unsung individuals. These were the engineers, the programmers, the technicians, and the mathematicians who worked tirelessly in the background, their contributions forming the invisible scaffolding upon which this monumental achievement was built. Dr. Richard T. Sutton stands as one of the most remarkable and unjustly overlooked of these hidden figures, his story a powerful chapter in the secret history of the space age. This introduction serves to pull back the curtain on that well-known history, and illuminate a corner that has remained in shadow for far too long. Our purpose is to trace the extraordinary life of a man who, by all conventional measures, should never have been in a position to influence the race to the moon. We will explore how a deaf boy from Kansas who was once labeled as slow by an education system that failed to understand him, rose to become one of NASA's most crucial mathematical minds. This is not merely a biography, it is an exploration of resilience, the incredible power of a different perspective, and the undeniable truth that genius can emerge from the most challenging of circumstances, often in ways that defy our expectations. We will delve into his early struggles where his fascination with wave theory and orbital mechanics was nurtured in solitude, away from the traditional classroom. We will follow his path through a skeptical academic world and into the high-stakes environment of NASA during the Cold War, a place where the ability to solve impossible problems was the only currency that mattered. Finally, we will unpack the specific mathematical challenges of the Apollo missions and reveal how Dr. Sutton's elegant and innovative models for trajectory calculation were instrumental in ensuring the safety and success of the lunar landing. His work was not just supportive, it was foundational, providing a level of precision that was critical when the margin for error was virtually zero. Ultimately, this story is more than just an account of one man's life. It is an inspiring testament to the idea that our greatest strengths can sometimes be forged in the very crucible of our perceived weaknesses. Dr. Sutton's silence was not an absence of ability, but a space for unparalleled focus. His inability to hear the world forced him to see it with a different kind of clarity, to find the hidden patterns that others missed amidst the noise. His legacy is not written in history books or carved into monuments, but it is written in the stars, in the graceful arc of a spacecraft traveling from the Earth to the moon, and in the silent perfect language of the mathematics that guided it home. He was the genius you never heard of, a phrase that carries a poignant double meaning. Dr. Richard T. Sutton's name is not etched into the popular memory of the space race alongside the astronauts and mission controllers who became household names. His face does not appear in the iconic photographs of jubilant celebrations at Mission Control in Houston. His anonymity was partly a product of the era's culture, which often relegated the engineers and mathematicians to the background, but it was also deeply connected to the very nature of his existence. Born completely deaf in 1930 in the humble, windswept plains of rural Kansas, Richard lived his entire life in a world without sound. His story was obscured not just by the times but by a profound silence that separated him from the hearing world around him, making his contributions as quiet as the vacuum of space he helped to conquer. In the 1930s and 40s, the opportunities available to a deaf child were severely limited, often defined by societal misconceptions and a crippling lack of resources. The prevailing belief was that a person who could not hear was inherently limited in their intellectual capacity, a flawed assumption that cast a long shadow over many lives. The world of abstract thought, of complex scientific theory, and especially of mathematics, was considered far beyond their reach. How could someone who couldn't participate in a spoken lecture or a verbal discussion possibly grasp the intricate dance of numbers and formulas? The world, in its ignorance, had already drawn a boundary around Richard's potential before he even had a chance to show what he was capable of. But from his earliest days, he demonstrated that his perception of the world was not a lesser version of reality. It was simply a different one, with its own unique advantages and profound insights. Richard did not listen to numbers. He experienced them in a more tactile and visual way that was completely foreign to his peers and teachers. For him, mathematics was not a dry or abstract subject communicated through the drone of lectures he could never hear. It was a tangible system of patterns, a visual rhythm, an elegant and perfectly ordered sequence that he could see and feel unfolding in the theater of his mind. He perceived the inherent beauty and logic in mathematical structures with a clarity that was unobscured by the noise and chatter of the outside world. It was a language he was born to understand, a form of communication more pure and precise than any spoken dialect. This unique, silent perspective was not a disadvantage. In the grand, cosmic scheme of his life's work, it would become his secret weapon, his greatest asset. His journey was therefore defined by a quiet, relentless determination to prove that his silence was not a barrier to brilliance, but a gateway to a deeper understanding. He navigated a world that was not built for him, a world that consistently underestimated his capabilities at every turn. Every academic achievement, every complex problem he solved, was a silent rebuttal to the low expectations that society had unfairly placed upon him. He was driven by an inner fire, a deep-seated need to explore the universe through the lens of its most fundamental language. This was the foundation of his genius, a mind sharpened by silence, focused by necessity, and uniquely attuned to the hidden patterns that govern the cosmos. His story is not one of overcoming a disability, but of harnessing a different way of being to achieve the truly extraordinary. From the very beginning, Richard's relationship with the world was one of intense observation. While other children learned through listening, to their parents' voices, to the radio, to the lessons of a teacher at the front of a classroom, Richard learned by watching. He saw the way sunlight slanted across the floorboards, changing its angle with the passing hours, and instinctively understood the geometry of it. He watched the intricate patterns of frost crystallizing on a window pane, and saw the natural emergence of mathematical fractals. His mind was not distracted by the cacophony of daily life. It was a pristine, quiet space where he could deconstruct the visual world into its core components, shapes, sequences, and systems. This silent environment fostered a level of concentration that was almost unbreakable, allowing him to lose himself for hours in the logical purity of a problem. This unique mode of learning set him apart in the rigid structure of the American school system of his time. Teachers, unequipped to handle a deaf student and unfamiliar with sign language, often mistook his silence for a lack of understanding. He couldn't answer questions verbally or participate in group discussions, so he was frequently overlooked, his profound internal processing mistaken for disinterest. While his classmates absorbed information through auditory repetition, Richard had to build his knowledge from the ground up, connecting concepts through visual logic alone. He became a master of recognizing patterns in written text and diagrams, finding the underlying rules that connected one idea to the next. His textbooks became his entire world, their pages filled not just with information, but with a silent dialogue between him and the greatest minds in history. This process, while isolating, gave him an incredible advantage in the realm of mathematics. He never had to rely on rote memorization of spoken formulas. Instead, he derived them himself, ensuring he understood their fundamental truth from first principles. For Richard, an equation wasn't just a string of symbols to be memorized, it was the conclusion of a logical story. a visual statement of a relationship he had already observed in the world, or worked out in his mind. This method meant that his understanding was deeper and more intuitive than that of many of his peers. He didn't just know that a formula worked, he knew why it worked, having built it piece by piece in the silent workshop of his intellect. This foundational visual approach to problem solving would become the hallmark of his later work at NASA. The world saw a boy who couldn't hear, but in reality Richard was listening to a different kind of symphony. It was the symphony of logic, the rhythm of causality, and the harmony of a perfectly balanced equation. His mind, free from auditory distraction, could focus entirely on this internal music. He found a profound beauty in the way numbers could describe the flight of a bird, the orbit of a planet, or the simple arc of a thrown stone. This was not a lesser experience of the world, it was a more focused one. He was developing a mental discipline and an intellectual rigor that were rare and powerful, forged in the crucible of silence. This silent world wasn't empty, it was filled to the brim with the elegant, unchanging truths of mathematics, waiting for a mind quiet enough to finally perceive them. Growing up in rural Kansas, Richard was surrounded by a landscape of vast, open spaces and boundless skies. The flat horizon offered an uninterrupted view of the heavens, a grand celestial theater that played out above him every single night. While the sounds of the farm, the wind rustling through wheat fields, the distant call of animals were lost to him, the sights were overwhelmingly vivid. The slow, majestic procession of the stars, the predictable phases of the moon, and the sudden brilliant streak of a meteor became his primary sources of wonder and fascination. In the profound stillness of the prairie night, he found a connection to the cosmos that was both deeply personal and intensely intellectual. The universe wasn't just something to look at, it was a puzzle to be solved, a grand silent dance whose steps he was determined to understand. His deafness shielded him from the distractions of a small town but amplified his perception of this cosmic order. He didn't need a narrator to explain the constellations, he traced their paths himself, night after night, noticing their subtle shifts with the changing seasons. This patient, methodical observation was his first lesson in celestial mechanics. He began to see the sky not as a random scattering of lights, but as a complex clockwork system governed by invisible laws. He started to sketch what he saw, not as an artist, but as a data collector. His notebooks filled with drawings of star charts and diagrams of the moon's path, each one an attempt to translate the visual spectacle into a language of patterns and predictable cycles. This was the nascent work of a trajectory modeler, beginning on the dusty plains of Kansas. This early passion was not merely a hobby, it was a form of self-education that far surpassed anything he was learning in his struggling school days. He began to seek out books on astronomy and physics, devouring texts on Newton's laws of motion and gravitation. While the language was complex, the underlying mathematics felt intuitive to him. He could visualize the forces at play, the sun's immense gravity holding the planets in their elliptical orbits, the delicate balance that kept the moon tethered to the Earth. The equations he found in these books were not abstract concepts. They were the written choreography for the cosmic dance he had been observing his entire life. He was connecting the tangible, visual world of the night sky with the intangible, logical world of mathematics, building a bridge between two realms of silent beauty. This unique upbringing, a combination of profound silence and vast open skies, shaped his mind in a way that no formal education ever could. It instilled in him a deep appreciation for empirical observation, a patient and meticulous nature, and an unshakable belief that even the most complex systems could be understood through the language of mathematics. The flat, endless landscape of his home mirrored the infinite possibilities he saw in numbers. It was here in the heart of America, far from the bustling hubs of scientific innovation, that a future NASA genius was quietly honing his skills. He was learning to read the silent language of the universe, a fluency that would one day be needed to chart a course for humanity's greatest adventure. The formal education system of the 1940s was a daunting and often unforgiving environment for a student like Richard Sutton. In an era before the concept of inclusive education had taken root, classrooms were rigid, one-size-fits-all institutions designed for a specific type of learner. For a deaf child, this structure was less a place of learning and more a crucible of daily struggle. Teachers, with little to no training in educating the deaf and no access to sign language interpreters, relied exclusively on spoken lectures. Richard found himself adrift in a sea of incomprehensible noise, watching mouths move and gestures fly, trying to piece together fragments of meaning from a world that was not designed to include him. It was an experience of profound intellectual isolation, a constant battle against being left behind. His silence in the classroom was consistently misinterpreted. Unable to respond to verbal questions or participate in oral drills, he was often labeled as slow or inattentive by well-meaning but misguided educators. His report cards reflected this misunderstanding, painting a picture of a student who was not meeting his potential, when in reality, his potential was simply not being accessed. Every day was an exercise in frustration, as he watched his peers absorb knowledge through a medium that was completely unavailable to him. He was a spectator to his own education, forced to sit on the sidelines while the game was played out in a language he could not understand. This experience could have easily broken his spirit, but instead, it ignited a quiet fire of defiance within him. This struggle, however, inadvertently forged the very tools he would need for his future success. Denied the passive route of auditory learning, Richard was forced to become an active, aggressive learner. He had to take control of his own education to find his own pathways to understanding. He learned to rely entirely on the written word, meticulously dissecting textbooks and diagrams to extract their core logic. He became a master observer, noticing the subtle cues and patterns in visual information that others missed. While his classmates were memorizing facts, Richard was reverse engineering concepts, building a far more robust and fundamental comprehension of the subjects he loved. The system's failure to teach him in a conventional way forced him to become his own superior teacher. The classroom, therefore, became a testing ground not just for his intellect but for his character. It taught him patience in the face of misunderstanding and resilience in the face of systemic barriers. He learned to operate independently, to trust his own cognitive processes, and to find motivation from within rather than from external validation. These were not lessons found in any textbook, they were lessons in survival, learned in the quiet solitude of his desk. The boy who was deemed slow was, in fact, developing a mind of exceptional discipline and focus, sharpened to a fine point by the very challenges that were meant to limit him. This early crucible of struggle was shaping a brilliance that the world was not yet prepared to see. Unable to find the intellectual stimulation he craved within the walls of his school, Richard created his own laboratory and classroom in the quiet corners of his family home. His curiosity was, well, truly boundless, and it drove him to explore the world through hands-on experimentation. At the age of 14, he became fascinated with the concept of radio waves, a phenomenon that existed entirely outside his sensory experience. He began building his own crystal radios, not with the goal of hearing broadcasts, but with the scientific aim of understanding the principles of wave theory. He would meticulously assemble the components, the wires, the coils, the crystals, and then use measuring instruments to detect and analyze the frequencies he was capturing. It was a purely intellectual pursuit, a way to see the invisible waves through the language of data and measurement. This passion for hands-on science quickly expanded into an obsession with astronomy and the mechanics of the cosmos. The vast Kansas night sky was his primary textbook, and he was not content to be a passive observer. Using scrap materials and lenses he had painstakingly acquired, he constructed his own homemade sextants and simple telescopes. With these instruments, he began to methodically track the movements of the planets and chart the positions of the stars. His notebooks from this period were not those of a typical teenager. They were filled with precise measurements, celestial coordinates, and detailed sketches of orbital paths. He was teaching himself the foundational practices of a field scientist: systematic observation, data collection, and rigorous analysis, all driven by his own insatiable curiosity. His evenings were dedicated to a rigorous program of self-study. By the dim light of a flashlight, long after his family had gone to sleep, he would lose himself in the works of the great scientific minds. He devoured books on Newtonian physics, grappling with the laws of motion and universal gravitation that governed the celestial ballet he observed each night. He pushed further, tackling the challenging concepts of Einstein's theory of relativity, visualizing the curvature of space-time in the silent theater of his mind. These were not subjects taught in his high school. This was a university-level education he was giving himself, driven by a profound need to understand the fundamental rules that governed the universe. He was building an intellectual framework far beyond his years. This period of intense, self-directed learning was pivotal. It transformed him from a frustrated student into a self-made scientist. He was not just accumulating facts, he was developing a sophisticated way of thinking, a problem-solving methodology rooted in empirical evidence and mathematical logic. His workshop and his moonlit studies were where his true education took place. It was here that he proved first and foremost to himself that his deafness was no impediment to his intellect. He was demonstrating that a mind, armed with curiosity and determination, could transcend any physical barrier and reach for the stars, both literally and metaphorically. The brilliance was beginning to shine through the struggles, clear and undeniable. As Richard neared high school graduation, his passion for math and physics pushed him to seek a university education. Despite his self-taught expertise, college after college rejected him, seeing only his deafness, not his talent. Refusing to give up, Richard persisted until a small technical college finally accepted him, on the condition he master lip reading, as no accommodations would be provided. For Richard, this was not a setback, but a challenge to be solved. He dove into both advanced mathematics and the art of lip reading, determined to prove his worth. The journey would be grueling, but Richard was ready to master both worlds. College was a new language for Richard, one he had to see, not hear. He sat in the front row, relying on the chalkboard and his own notes to reconstruct every lecture. Lip reading was exhausting, but it sharpened his visual thinking. Richard learned to see the logic in equations, building a unique skill set that set him apart. He soon outperformed many of his hearing peers, thriving through sheer discipline and visual mastery. These silent victories laid the foundation for his future at NASA. The space race demanded minds that could solve the impossible, regardless of background. As NASA searched for talent, the language that mattered most was mathematics, not speech. Richard's silent mastery of equations made him a perfect fit for the era's greatest challenge. In a world obsessed with sound, Richard's genius spoke through numbers. The moon mission needed precision, not volume. Richard's journey from outsider to essential contributor was about to begin. Richard's reputation grew quietly, his written work speaking louder than words. A Pasadena aerospace firm seeking pure problem solvers recruited him through written tests, no interviews, no phone calls. Richard's solutions were not just correct but elegant, impressing the firm's engineers. In the silent world of mathematics, his deafness was irrelevant. He was hired to work on the Apollo guidance program, judged solely by his mind. Richard's path to NASA was paved with silent brilliance. Pasadena's research center buzzed with urgency, equations covering every surface. Richard joined the trajectory modeling team, tasked with charting the moon mission's path. While others debated loudly, Richard observed, then delivered clear, written solutions. His notes cut through the noise, offering innovative answers to complex problems. He modeled endless what-ifs, ensuring safe passage for the astronauts. Richard's silent calculations became the backbone of Apollo's success. In the world of celestial mechanics, a trajectory is more than just a line on a chart. It is really a story written in the language of physics and calculus. It describes a delicate and dynamic dance between velocity, gravity, and time. For Richard Sutton, this was, honestly, the ultimate canvas for his unique talents. He didn't just calculate trajectories, he visualized them. In his mind, he could see the Apollo spacecraft as a single point of light, gracefully pirouetting through the void, pulled and pushed by the invisible tethers of gravity from the Earth, the Moon and the Sun. He could feel the rhythm of the journey, the violent acceleration of the launch, the long, quiet coast through deep space, the critical, nail-biting deceleration into lunar orbit. This intuitive, visual understanding allowed him to approach the mathematics with a level of insight that was, frankly, extraordinary. His work went far beyond the simple Newtonian calculations that formed the basis of orbital mechanics. The Apollo mission was a problem of immense complexity, requiring a level of precision that pushed the boundaries of known mathematics. Richard's genius lay in his ability to model the subtle, second-order effects that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. He developed equations that accounted for the non-uniformity of the Earth's and Moon's gravitational fields, recognizing that these celestial bodies were not perfect spheres. He factored in the minuscule but constant pressure of solar radiation on the spacecraft's skin, a tiny force that, over a journey of several days, could push it significantly off course. This was mathematics at its most intricate and elegant. One of Richard's most significant contributions during this period was in the area of fuel optimization. The Apollo spacecraft was a vehicle of brutally finite resources, Every ounce of fuel was precious, and every engine burn had to be calculated to be as efficient as possible. Richard created models that determined the absolute optimal windows for these burns. His equations showed that by firing the engine at a precise moment for a precise duration, the spacecraft could use the moon's own gravity to help it gracefully swing into orbit, a maneuver known as a free return trajectory. This not only saved a tremendous amount of fuel but also acted as a crucial safety feature. If the main engine failed, the spacecraft's momentum would still sling it around the moon and send it back toward Earth. This was not a world of artificial intelligence or sophisticated computer simulations. These foundational calculations were done by hand with chalk, slide rules, and sheer brain power. Richard's desk was a landscape of paper filled with pages upon pages of dense, complex equations. But to him, it was not mere number crunching. It was a creative act, a process of giving mathematical form to a great human adventure. He was crafting the invisible rails that would guide the astronauts across the heavens. In the quiet, focused environment of the Pasadena lab, far from the roar of the rockets he would never hear, Richard Sutton was composing the silent symphony that would take humanity to the moon. Landing on the moon was not fundamentally a challenge of rocketry. It was, at its core, a challenge of mathematics. The rockets provided the brute force, the raw power to escape Earth's gravity. But power without precision was useless, even dangerous. The journey across the quarter-million-mile void was a delicate ballet governed by numbers, where the slightest miscalculation could lead to mission failure and the loss of the crew. The stakes were absolute. There was no room for approximation, no possibility of a second chance. The math had to be perfect. The problem facing Richard Sutton and his colleagues was one with no margin for error, a cosmic equation where the only acceptable answer was success. Every single digit in their calculations carried the weight of human lives and a nation's dream. The journey began with the launch window, a sliver of time that had to be calculated with pinpoint accuracy. The Earth was spinning on its axis while also hurtling through space in its orbit around the Sun. The Moon, their target, was also a moving object, orbiting the Earth at over 2,000 miles per hour. The task was like trying to throw a dart from a moving carousel to hit a moving target on another distant carousel. If the launch angle was too shallow, the Apollo spacecraft would ricochet off Earth's dense upper atmosphere, skipping back into space like a stone on a pond, lost forever. If the angle was too steep, the friction would be too great, and the command module would incinerate upon re-entry, becoming a man-made meteor streaking across the sky. Once in space, the challenges only multiplied. The path to the moon was not a straight line. It was a complex, curving trajectory shaped by the competing gravitational pulls of the Earth, the moon, and even the sun. The spacecraft was in a constant state of falling, first falling away from the Earth, then falling towards the moon. The calculations had to predict this gravitational handoff with perfect precision. A 1-second error in the timing of a crucial engine burn, a single miscalculation in the required thrust, could send the astronauts past the moon and into the endless emptiness of solar orbit, with no hope of return. The math was their only lifeline, the invisible tether that kept them connected to home. This was the world where Richard Sutton's mind thrived. He understood that these were not just abstract numbers on a page, they were the digital DNA of the mission's survival. His ability to visualize complex systems allowed him to see the entire journey as a single, interconnected mathematical problem. He saw the launch, the coast, the lunar orbit insertion, and the return as parts of a unified whole, where an error in one phase would have cascading consequences for all the others. He and his team were not just solving equations, they were building a mathematical cage of safety around the astronauts, a cage woven from the pure, unyielding logic of numbers, strong enough to withstand the unforgiving realities of space. The universe is not a perfect, clean Newtonian clockwork. It is a messy and dynamic place, full of subtle forces that can disrupt the most carefully laid plans. A simple calculation of gravity between two perfect spheres was not enough to get to the moon. The real-world problem was far more complex. These subtle, unpredictable forces were known as perturbations, and they were the bane of every trajectory planner. Richard Sutton's particular genius lay in his ability to anticipate and model these tiny, almost imperceptible variables. He excelled at accounting for the cosmic static that could interfere with the mission's perfect mathematical signal. His equations were known for their elegance because they were robust enough to handle the universe as it truly was, not just as it appeared in a textbook. One of his key areas of focus was modeling gravitational anomalies. The Earth and the Moon are not uniform spheres. They have lumpy, uneven gravitational fields caused by the distribution of mass within them, such as mountains on the surface and dense concentrations of rock below. As the Apollo spacecraft flew over these areas, it would experience tiny, almost imperceptible tugs of gravity, speeding up or slowing down by minuscule amounts. Over the course of a 3-day journey, these tiny tugs could add up, pulling the spacecraft dangerously off its planned course. Richard developed sophisticated models that treated the Moon not as a perfect ball, but as a complex gravitational map, allowing the flight plan to account for these gravitational lumps and bumps with incredible precision. Another perturbation Richard tackled was thrust variability. A rocket engine is not a perfect machine. It does not deliver the exact same amount of thrust every single time it is fired. There are tiny fluctuations in fuel flow, temperature, and combustion efficiency that can cause the engine's performance to vary slightly. While these variations were small, during a critical maneuver like lunar orbit insertion, even a 1% difference in thrust could be the difference between a stable orbit and a catastrophic crash. Richard created statistical models that incorporated this element of uncertainty, defining a performance box for each engine burn. This allowed mission control to understand the range of possible outcomes and make real-time adjustments if an engine slightly under or overperformed. Finally, Richard's models had to account for something that seems simple but is profoundly complex in space travel: signal lag. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, but over the vast distance to the Moon, this meant there was a delay of over a second each way. You couldn't just tell the spacecraft to do something and have it happen instantly. A command sent from Houston would take more than a second to arrive, and the confirmation telemetry would take another second to come back. Richard's equations had to build this communication delay into the very fabric of the guidance system, ensuring that commands were sent in advance so they would be executed at the precise moment they were needed. His elegant math was a language that could speak across time and space, accounting for every variable no matter how small. As the world held its breath on July 20, 1969, the Apollo 11 mission reached its most critical phase, the powered descent to the lunar surface. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, inside the lunar module named Eagle, had separated from the command module and were beginning their final approach. This was, the moment where decades of planning and years of calculations would be put to the ultimate test. The Eagle was not landing on a prepared runway, it was descending toward a hostile alien terrain of craters and boulders. The success of the landing depended on a series of perfectly timed and executed engine burns, all controlled by a tiny, primitive onboard computer, whose guidance logic was built upon the foundational mathematics developed by Richard Sutton and his team. During the descent, as Armstrong looked out the window, he realized the Eagle's automated landing system was taking them directly toward a large, boulder-strewn crater. He had to take manual control. This was a scenario that mission planners had feared, a moment of high-stakes improvisation. But even as Armstrong piloted the lander, the onboard computer continued to run its programs, feeding him critical data on altitude, descent rate, and, most importantly, remaining fuel. The calculations that determined the timing of the descent engine burns, which controlled their speed, were a direct product of Richard's work on fuel optimization and thrust modeling. His math was the invisible co-pilot in the cockpit, giving Armstrong the information he needed to fly. Back in Houston, mission control was a scene of intense, controlled chaos. But in the background, the large mainframe computers were churning through Richard's equations, running real-time simulations and predicting the Eagle's trajectory based on the incoming telemetry. His models were so elegant and efficient that they could be used to reprogram and update the guidance computer mid-mission if necessary. When Armstrong extended the landing sequence to search for a safe spot, every second he spent hovering used up precious fuel. It was Richard's mathematical models that allowed flight controllers to confidently tell the crew they still had enough fuel to land safely, giving them the assurance they needed in the mission's most nail-biting moments. Richard Sutton, however, was not at mission control. He was at his home, far from the noise and the drama. He could not hear the tense communications between Houston and the Moon. He couldn't hear the famous words, "The Eagle has landed," spoken by Armstrong, nor could he hear the thunderous applause and cheers of relief that erupted around the world. He experienced the triumph in his own way, through the silent confirmation that the numbers had been correct. The landing was the ultimate validation of his life's work. The mathematical path he had helped to chart had been followed, and the astronauts were safe. His calculations, born in the quiet of his mind, had reached across the void and gently touched the surface of the moon. The safe landing of Apollo 11 was not a single moment of triumph, but the culmination of thousands of small mathematical victories. It was the sum total of every correctly modeled perturbation, every optimized fuel burn, and every precisely calculated trajectory. Richard Sutton's contribution was not a single famous equation, but a deep and pervasive influence on the very logic of the guidance system. His work formed part of the mission's intellectual bedrock, an invisible foundation of mathematical certainty, upon which the entire audacious enterprise was built. Without this level of precision, the brute force of the Saturn V rocket would have been for nothing. It was the math, silent and elegant, that transformed raw power into a successful mission. His models did more than just guide the spacecraft, they gave the astronauts and mission controllers confidence. By accounting for so many variables, from gravitational anomalies to engine fluctuations, his work provided a robust framework for decision-making. When unexpected events occurred, like the landing site issue for Apollo 11, the system didn't fail. The underlying math was flexible enough to allow for human intervention, providing the necessary data for Armstrong to make an informed life-or-death decision in real time. This fusion of human skill and mathematical precision was the secret to Apollo's success. The equations weren't a rigid script, they were a dynamic tool, a language that allowed humans to have a conversation with the complex physics of spaceflight. The legacy of Richard's mathematical work extended far beyond Apollo 11. The models he helped develop were refined and used for all subsequent Apollo missions, each one building on the success of the last. His methods for trajectory optimization and perturbation analysis became standard practice, influencing the design of unmanned probes sent to explore the outer planets and beyond. The quiet, meticulous work done in the 1960s with slide rules and chalk laid the mathematical groundwork for decades of space exploration. His silent calculations continued to echo through the cosmos long after the Apollo program ended, embedded in the guidance systems of spacecraft venturing to Mars, Jupiter, and the far reaches of our solar system. In the end, Richard Sutton never heard the roar of the rocket or the triumphant words from the moon. But he didn't need to. For him, the beauty was not in the sound, but in the solution. It was in the perfect arc of the trajectory, the seamless insertion into lunar orbit, and the safe descent to the surface. It was the knowledge that a problem of immense complexity had been solved through the pure universal language of mathematics. The landing was a testament to the power of a mind that could see the patterns of the universe with a clarity unobscured by noise. It was his math, his silent, brilliant math, that helped make it all possible. After the historic triumph of the Apollo missions and the end of the frantic race to the moon, the intense spotlight on NASA began to fade. For many, this marked the end of a golden era. But for Dr. Richard Sutton, the conclusion of the Apollo program was not an end, but a transition. He had no interest in the public accolades or victory parades. His satisfaction came from the successful solution of the problem, not from the applause that followed. He continued his work in the aerospace industry for several more years, contributing his expertise to the Skylab program and the early conceptual stages of the space shuttle, always preferring the quiet background to the noisy foreground. His work remained as precise and impactful as ever, a steady, silent hand guiding the next generation of spaceflight. However, Richard's focus began to shift from the cosmos to the classroom. Having conquered the mathematical challenges of space, he turned his attention to a different kind of complex problem: the barriers facing students with disabilities in the fields of science and mathematics. He understood, from a lifetime of personal experience, that the greatest obstacle was not the disability itself, but the lack of access and low expectations of the educational system. He had forged his own path through sheer will, but he was determined to make the journey easier for those who came after him. He quietly began to dedicate his time to mentoring, seeking out young, bright minds who were being overlooked because they did not fit the conventional mold of a student. He never sought a formal teaching position at a grand university. Instead, his mentorship was a personal, grassroots effort. He volunteered at schools for the deaf and worked with community programs for students with various disabilities. He would spend hours communicating through written notes and diagrams, patiently deconstructing complex mathematical concepts in the same visual, intuitive way he had taught himself decades earlier. He saw the same spark of brilliance in these students that others had missed in him. He knew that a mind that processed the world differently was not a deficient mind, but one with the potential for unique and powerful insights. He wasn't just teaching math, he was teaching resilience and self-worth, showing these students that their perceived limitations could be their greatest strengths. This work was done far from the public eye. Richard Sutton didn't give grand speeches about accessibility or write impassioned articles about educational reform. His advocacy was in his actions. In a world that often measures impact by the noise it creates, his influence was a quiet, steady ripple. He never appeared in interviews, and his name was rarely mentioned in the press. In fact, many of his colleagues from his NASA days were unaware of his profound deafness, knowing him only as the quiet, brilliant mathematician who communicated through the universal language of science. His legacy was being built not in headlines, but in the lives of the students he inspired, one equation and one quiet word of encouragement at a time. Richard's advocacy extended beyond one-on-one mentoring and into the very tools of science and technology. He recognized that the dawning computer age presented both immense opportunities and potential new barriers for the deaf community. In the 1970s and early 1980s, as computing became more prevalent, user interfaces were still largely text-based, relying on command line inputs and screen outputs. Richard saw this as a great equalizer. In the world of the computer, communication was silent and written, a level playing field where his deafness was completely irrelevant. He became an early and passionate advocate for using computers as educational tools, particularly in mathematics and programming, for deaf and hard-of-hearing students. He dedicated his personal time to helping develop some of the first text-based programming environments designed specifically with accessibility in mind. He worked with software developers and educators to create tutorials and systems that were entirely visual, relying on clear, written instructions and logical flowcharts rather than on auditory cues or spoken lectures. His insight was invaluable. He understood how a deaf person processed information visually and was able to guide the design of these early educational programs to be more intuitive and effective. He was helping to build the digital ramps and accessible doorways to the world of technology, ensuring that the next generation of deaf scientists would have tools that he could only have dreamed of as a young man. His push for accessible materials in mathematics education was relentless and characteristically quiet. He would meticulously review new textbooks, identifying areas where concepts were explained in a purely auditory-dependent way. He would then write long, detailed letters to publishers, complete with his own hand-drawn diagrams and alternative, visually-based explanations. He argued that making materials more visual and less reliant on abstract verbal descriptions did not just benefit deaf students, it benefited all students. A well-designed diagram, a clear flowchart, or an elegant equation was a form of communication more universal and more precise than any spoken language. He was championing a more inclusive and effective way of teaching for everyone. This quiet, persistent advocacy had a lasting impact. While his name might not be attached to any specific law or famous educational theory, his influence can be seen in the foundational principles of accessible design that are now commonplace. The idea that information should be presented in multiple formats, that visual learning is a powerful tool, and that technology should be designed to be inclusive from the ground up. These are all concepts that Richard Sutton championed through his actions long before they became mainstream. He understood that true access wasn't about providing accommodations as an afterthought. It was about fundamentally rethinking how we communicate knowledge, using the universal language of logic and clarity to break down barriers. As the years passed, Richard Sutton's name did not become a household word. His story was not turned into a blockbuster movie, and his face did not appear on the cover of magazines. His legacy is of a much quieter, more profound nature. It is not a legacy written in bold headlines, but one that must be looked for in the more subtle corners of history. You can find his name tucked away in the footnotes of dense academic papers on celestial mechanics, or in the acknowledgments of technical manuals for the Apollo guidance computer. His contributions are not celebrated with statues or monuments, but they are embedded in the very functions and formulas that guided astronauts safely home from the moon, a silent signature on one of humanity's greatest achievements. His influence is also encoded in the technology he helped to pioneer. The mathematical modeling techniques he helped develop for tracking spacecraft are the conceptual ancestors of the global positioning system that we all use today. The principles of calculating trajectories through complex, multivariable systems are foundational to fields as diverse as weather prediction, satellite communications, and even financial modeling. His work on optimizing for tiny perturbations has parallels in the algorithms that make modern computer networks more efficient. His genius contributed to a current of scientific progress that flows silently beneath the surface of our modern world, a powerful but unseen force that continues to shape our technological landscape. Perhaps his most important legacy, however, is the one he built through the people he inspired. The young disabled students he mentored who were once told what they couldn't do went on to become engineers, programmers, and scientists themselves. They carried forward his belief that a different perspective is a powerful asset. Each one of them became a living testament to his quiet philosophy, that brilliance is not defined by how one communicates with the world, but by how one solves the problems within it. This human legacy, a chain of inspiration passed from one generation to the next, is perhaps the most enduring and powerful monument to his life's work. It is a legacy that continues to grow, quietly and steadily, long after he is gone. In the grand narrative of history, some figures are destined to be the thunderous protagonists, their voices echoing through the ages. Others, like Richard Sutton, are the unsung heroes whose work forms the silent, essential foundation upon which those epic stories are built. He was a man who worked in silence, lived in humility, and left behind a legacy written not in words, but in the elegant, immutable language of numbers. His story is a powerful reminder that the most significant contributions are not always the loudest, and that true genius can often be found in the quietest of places, waiting patiently to be discovered. Dr. Richard T. Sutton's story resonates so deeply today because it fundamentally challenges our modern, often noisy, definitions of genius and influence. In a culture that frequently equates visibility with value and loudness with leadership, his life offers a powerful and necessary counter-narrative. We are conditioned to look for brilliance in the spotlight on the grand stage, in the viral video, or in the charismatic keynote speech. Richard's legacy reminds us that some of the most profound contributions to human progress are made far from the crowd, in the quiet, focused solitude of a disciplined mind. His story compels us to listen more closely to the silence, to seek out the genius that doesn't announce itself but simply gets to work solving the problems that matter. His journey is a testament to the idea that brilliance doesn't shout, it calculates, it designs, it solves. While the world was captivated by the thunderous roar of the Saturn V rocket, Richard's genius was whispering in the elegant language of differential equations. He proves that true impact is not measured in decibels or headlines but in the quiet, irrefutable evidence of a problem solved, a system perfected, or a path made safe. His life serves as an essential reminder for our own time, urging us to look beyond the superficial metrics of success, and to recognize and celebrate the quiet, often invisible work that underpins our greatest collective achievements, from scientific breakthroughs to social progress. Furthermore, Richard's story gracefully dismantles the persistent myth that disability is synonymous with limitation. At a time when society saw his deafness as an insurmountable barrier to a life of the mind, he demonstrated that it could be the very source of his unique strength. His silence was not an absence. It was a space for unparalleled concentration, a shield against the distractions that can cloud creative thought. He showed the world that a different way of perceiving reality is not a deficit, but a distinct advantage, offering a perspective that a normal sensory experience might miss. His life proves that genius is not contingent on a specific set of physical abilities, but on the limitless potential of the human intellect to adapt, focus, and create. This lesson is more crucial now than ever. As we strive to build more inclusive and equitable societies, Richard's story stands as a beacon. It illustrates that when we create barriers based on our narrow definitions of ability, we risk silencing the very minds we need most. His journey is a call to action to tear down those barriers, to provide access for all, and to actively seek out the diverse perspectives that are essential for solving the complex challenges of our future. Richard Sutton's story matters because it teaches us that true genius doesn't care how you hear or see the world. It only cares that you have the courage and the opportunity to change it for the better. Beyond the inspiring narrative of overcoming adversity, Richard Sutton's story matters because it highlights the profound, practical power of a different perspective. In science and engineering, the greatest breakthroughs often come not from doing the same thing better, but from seeing the problem in an entirely new light. Richard's deafness, forced him to develop a uniquely visual and pattern-based mode of thinking. He didn't just learn mathematics. He experienced it as a visual language of shapes, sequences, and structures. This gave him an intuitive grasp of complex, multi-dimensional problems like orbital mechanics that was fundamentally different from that of his hearing colleagues, who often relied more heavily on linear, verbally mediated logic. It was this different way of seeing that allowed him to find elegant solutions that others had missed. This principle is honestly a cornerstone of modern innovation. Today, the most successful teams in technology, science, and business are those that bring together individuals with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and cognitive styles. Richard's life is a perfect case study in why this diversity is not just a social good, but a strategic imperative. His unique viewpoint was not just an interesting quirk, it was a mission-critical asset for NASA. He could see the subtle perturbations and weave the complex mathematical tapestry of the Apollo trajectories precisely because his mind was not wired in the conventional way. His story proves that the most powerful problem-solving tool is a room full of different minds looking at the same challenge from a multitude of angles. His legacy encourages us to actively cultivate and value cognitive diversity. It challenges institutions to move beyond simply accommodating differences and to start seeking them out as sources of strength. What other disabilities or unique life experiences might hold the key to solving our most intractable problems, from climate change to disease? Richard's story suggests that the next great breakthrough might come from a mind that processes information in a way we don't yet understand or appreciate. It urges us to question our assumptions about what a brilliant scientist or engineer looks and sounds like, and to create environments where every kind of mind can thrive and contribute its unique perspective to the collective endeavor. Ultimately, Richard Sutton's story is a celebration of seeing the world differently. He didn't just adapt to a world that wasn't built for him, he used his unique vantage point to perceive its underlying mechanics with a clarity that was all his own. He saw the silent music of the cosmos, the visual rhythm of calculus, the hidden patterns in the chaos. His story matters because it teaches us that the most valuable map for navigating the future may not come from the well-trodden path, but from the person who sees a completely different route, one that is invisible to the rest of us until they have the courage to draw it. Section 3. Paving the Way. The Legacy of Silent Strength. Finally, Richard Sutton's story matters because it is a legacy of empowerment. His life and work did not end with the Apollo program. They became a quiet but powerful force that helped pave the way for future generations. By simply succeeding at the highest level, by refusing to be limited by his circumstances, he became a powerful role model. He was living proof that a deaf person could be a brilliant mathematician, that a disability did not have to define one's destiny. His very existence in the labs of NASA was a silent but powerful statement against the prejudices of his time, creating a crack in the wall of exclusion that others could then push through, widening the opening for those who followed. His later work in mentoring students with disabilities and advocating for accessible technology transformed his personal triumph into a shared inheritance. He wasn't content to be the sole exception, he was determined to make his path the rule. He translated his own struggles into a roadmap for others, championing the tools and teaching methods that would make the journey easier. This deliberate, quiet work of paying it forward is a crucial part of his legacy. He understood that true strength is not just about overcoming your own obstacles, but about reaching back to help remove the obstacles for others, ensuring the path behind you is smoother than the one you traveled. Today we see the fruits of this silent strength everywhere. Deaf and disabled scientists, engineers, and programmers are at the forefront of innovation in fields like artificial intelligence, medicine, and yes, space exploration. They stand on the shoulders of pioneers like Richard Sutton, who proved it could be done. His story provides a vital historical thread, connecting the struggles of the past to the achievements of the present. It gives today's generation of diverse thinkers a hero to look up to. Not a loud, famous celebrity, but a quiet, determined problem solver who changed the world with the power of his mind. His legacy is a source of inspiration, a reminder that they belong in these fields. Because of Richard Sutton, the world learned a valuable lesson. It learned that brilliance knows no physical boundaries, and and that determination is a force more powerful than any societal prejudice. He paved the way not with grand gestures or loud proclamations, but with the quiet, undeniable force of his own excellence and the gentle, persistent support he offered to others. His story matters because it is a timeless testament to silent strength, a celebration of a man who, without ever hearing a single launch, helped humanity reach for the moon, and in doing so, opened up a new universe of possibilities for everyone back on Earth. In the final analysis, the story of Dr. Richard T. Sutton is a profound meditation on the nature of greatness and the substance of legacy. His journey began in the quiet fields of Kansas, and culminated in the silent void between worlds, a testament to a mind that flourished not in spite of silence, but because of it. We have traced his path from the isolating classrooms that failed to understand him, to the high-stakes laboratories that came to depend on his unique genius. We have seen how his different way of perceiving the world, a visual and pattern-based intuition, allowed him to unravel the celestial mechanics that made the journey to the moon possible. He was a man who could not hear the countdown, yet his calculations were the very rhythm to which the mission danced. This narrative has sought to illuminate the contributions of a true hidden figure, a man whose work was as foundational as the bedrock beneath the launch pad, yet as invisible as the gravitational forces he so elegantly modeled. His life teaches us that the most critical contributions are not always the most visible. True impact is often quiet, woven into the very fabric of a system, embedded in the logic of a solution, or passed on through the quiet inspiration of mentorship. Dr. Sutton's legacy is not carved in stone but is written in the successful trajectories of the Apollo missions, in the accessible educational tools he championed, and in the careers of the students he empowered to follow in his footsteps, proving that a different perspective is a powerful gift. His story serves as a powerful and enduring lesson for our own time. It reminds us to look for brilliance in unexpected places and to challenge our own preconceived notions of what ability looks like. In a world that continues to prize noise and visibility, Dr. Sutton's quiet competence is a call for a deeper appreciation of silent strength and focused dedication. He demonstrated that the most universal language is not spoken, but is found in the shared pursuit of knowledge, in the elegance of a mathematical proof, and in the collaborative effort to achieve something once thought impossible. His work helped humanity touch the moon, but his life helps us touch a more profound truth about human potential. Ultimately, the tale of the deaf mathematician who helped NASA land on the moon is more than just a fascinating piece of history. It is an inspirational blueprint for resilience, innovation, and inclusion. It shows us that the universe does not demand that we all be the same, it only asks that we bring our unique minds to bear on its mysteries. Richard Sutton never heard the roar of the rocket, and he never heard the applause that echoed around the globe. But the silent, perfect arc of a spacecraft traveling from one world to another was his symphony, a timeless echo of his brilliant mathematics. The final measure of a mind like Dr. Richard T. Sutton's cannot be fully captured in a single story. His life's work was a quiet revolution, a gentle but firm insistence that the content of one's intellect is the only metric that truly matters. He navigated a world that was not built for him and without complaint or fanfare proceeded to help redesign its boundaries. He proved that genius is not a function of how we take in the world through our senses but how we process it, question it, and ultimately improve it through the power of our thoughts. His journey from a misunderstood boy in Kansas to a pivotal figure in the space race is a testament to the unyielding power of a focused and determined human spirit when faced with extraordinary challenges. As we conclude this exploration, we are left with a call to action. It is a call to recognize and uplift the hidden talents that exist all around us, in every community and in every field of endeavor. It is an encouragement to create environments in our schools, our workplaces, and our societies, where every type of mind is not just accommodated but celebrated for its unique perspective. The next Richard Sutton might be a young girl who thinks in pictures, a boy who finds solace in patterns, or anyone who sees the world from a slightly different angle. Their potential is a precious resource, and it is our collective responsibility to ensure it is not silenced by prejudice or lack of opportunity. His story is a reminder that the greatest minds in history are not always the ones with the loudest voices. Sometimes they are the ones with the quietest resolve, the deepest focus, and the most elegant solutions. Dr. Sutton's life invites us to reconsider our heroes, to expand our pantheon of greatness to include those who worked in the background, whose names were written in footnotes instead of headlines, but whose contributions changed the world nonetheless. His place among history's greatest minds is secured not by fame, but by the irrefutable fact that when humanity took its first steps onto another world, it was his silent mathematics that helped light the way. He never heard the rocket launch, he never heard the thunderous applause, but the moon felt the precision of his numbers, and the stars bear witness to the trajectory of his genius. His legacy is a quiet but powerful hum that resonates through the history of exploration, a reminder that the most profound strength is often silent, and that the reach of a brilliant mind is truly limitless. The story of Dr. Richard T. Sutton is, and will always be, a testament to the extraordinary power of a quiet mind in a loud world, and a celebration of the silent genius that helped us reach for the stars.